Our guest today went from backstage on Broadway to centre stage in the urban farming revolution with one of the world's most innovative companies.
From Blue Tribe Media, this is the Good Business Podcast, the show where we talk to business leaders, social entrepreneurs and innovators about aligning profit with purpose and how you can make doing good for business. Now here's your host, James McGregor.
Today's episode of the Good Business Podcast, I'm talking with Sam Schatz, who's the Managing Director and Global Head of Farm Development for AeroFarms. AeroFarms is a leading clean technology company that builds and operates responsible state-of-the-art indoor vertical farms all over the world, enabling local production and transforming agriculture. They're a certified B Corp, and AeroFarms has been recognized by Fast Company as one of the world's most innovative companies for food 2 years in a row, and by Inc. as one of the top 25 disruptive companies in the world. In this episode, I talk with Sam about his background in venture capital and how he came to take the leading role in one of the most innovative urban farming businesses in the world, the challenges of building a disruptive company, and we get a glimpse at the future of farming. So let's kick off with, for people who don't know who you are, why don't you start with introducing yourself and tell us who you are?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Sam Schatz. I am the Managing Director of Corporate Development here at AeroFarms. Practically what that means is I lead new farm development for the company, both here in the United States and internationally. I joined the company as the first employee after the founders. This was back in 2012, and have since been with the organization and have helped it grow to over 150 people. And we're rapidly expanding our organization, so it's very exciting.
Right. And tell us something that most people may not know about you.
Yeah, well, so I'm actually born and raised in New York City, but I'm actually a fifth generation New Yorker. And my grandfather was actually the head of the Schubert organization in New York, and they were involved in a lot of the revitalization of New York City, and they produced a lot of Broadway shows. And so I kind of grew up within the theater industry and had this amazing exposure at a very young age to all of these incredible Broadway productions, and was like climbing around the cat stage when I was a kid. And so that's, not a lot of people know that about me, but it's a big inspiration. My grandfather was a big inspiration for me, and also just seeing all those shows growing up and seeing the amazing potential, human potential of those productions, I think was a big driver for me in my career. So
that must have been so cool as a kid, like being backstage and seeing what was going on.
Yeah, it was. I mean, there definitely had a couple run-ins at a young age with celebrities, and it was quite an odd upbringing.
Any names you want to drop?
Well, there was once there was a show called I think the Blue Room with Nicole Kidman, and there was this whole. We went to the opening, and I was maybe like a teenager, and there was all of this news about how Nicole Kidman was going to be in the nude, and this was like a big deal, and all the papers were writing about it. And I was just this clueless teenager, and all of these newspapers were trying to get a stupid quote from a teenager about how excited they were to see Nicole Kidman, and I had no idea what was happening or even what the show was about. And I ended up like seeing it, and then I got to meet her afterwards. And it was pretty hilarious. I didn't give any of those papers what they wanted, but those types of experiences. So.
All right, so tell us a little bit about AeroFarms.
Yeah, so AeroFarms is employing the latest in technology called aeroponics, which is a form of hydroponics where we mist the roots with macro and micronutrients, and then we use the latest in LED technology, and then the combination of those two with proprietary racking system, we build vertical farms, and these vertical farms are located in structures that look like warehouses purposefully, so that we could utilize real estate that is available in the market more regularly, and we use essentially a fraction of the land that's needed because we're growing indoors and we're growing 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We have up to 26 crop turns a year versus maybe you get 2 or 3 in the field, but we're also growing every day of the year, so it's year-round production, but we also grow on up to 14 levels and have a better crop density as a result of how we seed the plants. And so as a result, we get about 400 times the productivity per square foot of a conventional farm. And because of the aeroponic technology, we use about 95% less water because we're able to recapture and reuse the water. And then you combine that with not needing to use any pesticides and about half of the fertilizer You have really controlled environment agriculture to the next level, where you're really able to finally control the plants in a way where you can optimize things like taste and texture and nutrition in a controlled environment and use a fraction of the inputs.
Yeah. And what sort of crops are you growing in these farms?
So we're vertically integrated, and the systems that we've designed are the ones that are commercially available are designed to grow short stem leafy green plants, which is not too different from what many other folks that are looking at this industry are looking to do. I think the difference from our standpoint is we all of the technology is in house at AeroFarms. So we have our own staff of engineers who've internally developed this technology. We have all the software developed here internally that integrates with all the data. We have partnerships on some of the sensors and things like that to make sure that we're collecting the right type of data. But what's really neat about AeroFarms is we're actually able to, because we have that vertical integration, we're able to leverage all that know-how in growing leafy greens, and we're able to actually design systems to be optimized towards many other crops. And so we have another side of our business that's very focused on developing new crops for what we call, our strategic partners, the folks that are, similar to the supply chain issues in leafy greens. There are other folks in other industries that are trying to solve supply chain issues within their own supply chains, and they see indoor ag as a potential mechanism of doing that. And so because of that vertical integration, we're able to assist in evaluating, the extent to which we can commercialize those technologies.
Yeah, cool. So that's a good background about what AeroFarms is, I guess, today. Can you maybe take us back to the beginning around, the idea behind AeroFarms and why was it started in the first place, and what was the primary problem the founding team was trying to solve in the establishment of AeroFarms?
Yeah, so to go back to the very, very beginning, back in 2004, actually, way before I knew anything about any of this. I was still in college at the time, but Professor Ed Harwood at Cornell University essentially built the first AeroFarm system, essentially to prove a point that aeroponics was something that could be commercially scaled. It wasn't something that had typically been thought to be commercially viable because of issues with nozzles clogging and just doing it at scale. And so he essentially developed systems and built them essentially in his garage. And actually back then it wasn't even with LEDs. He was using fluorescent tubes. With his success with the aeroponic system, he actually started AeroFarms back in 2004, and he was an OEM for a number of years and sold a number of systems. And then in 2011, David Rosenberg and Mark Oshima came and restructured the company around owning and operating. And that was the really big transition. And the idea was there was a need to continue to operate these facilities to be able to improve on the technology. And the only way to do that was to own and operate them and not necessarily be selling the systems. And so the reasons why the founders, particularly David, our CEO, got into this area, and the main problem he was trying to solve was really around water. And the idea was, essentially 70% of fresh water goes to agriculture. So if you wanted to, and then 70% of our freshwater contamination comes from agriculture. So if you wanted to solve water, you really needed to get into ag. And, they surveyed a number of different technologies, and they found that aeroponics used even less water than many other comparable technologies. And because of the aeroponic misting, it allowed for accelerated growth because the roots, it allowed oxygenation of the root system. And so they felt that technology was the furthest along and had the most viability. And then also the crops that the systems were designed around were had particular problems in the United States from a sourcing standpoint. Leafy greens are typically grown in either Salinas Valley or in Yuma, Arizona, or parts of Mexico. And then what happens is they're grown in these areas where there really isn't that much water. A lot of the water that is brought in is pumped, obviously in California from the Colorado River at great cost. One of the misconceptions about water is it's also energy. A big portion of California's energy bill goes to moving or treating water. But so they have to use traditional irrigation methods. They're not able to use drip irrigation on these types of crops. So it's very water intensive. lot of pesticide usage, and then a lot of that runoff ends up going into our waterways and needs to be treated and creates a whole host of problems. But then primarily the issue is they're using non-potable water sources for that irrigation. And that's one of the reasons why you have a lot of the issues with food safety in the US around E. coli, salmonella, particularly in leafy greens. So by going indoors, you can use potable water sources and you are really able to control that aspect of things. And then also, you're saving, you're disintermediating the supply chain. So you're essentially able to save all of those trucking miles across the country by basically building these vertical farms local to where the consumer is and supplying them much more directly with these vertical farms. And then, being able to do that using a fraction of the land, 0 pesticides, half the fertilizer, and ultimately producing a plant that is cleaner, looks better, tastes better, at the same price that is typically produced in traditional methods.
So I was actually just about to ask you that. So I can see, I guess, the environmental mission behind why AeroFarms was established, but for the average consumer, they're not going to the supermarket to buy their leafy greens to solve water efficiency issues or to reduce the amount of trucking miles of their produce across the country. So is that value proposition you mentioned there around E. coli, the food's safer? How do you why is someone who's going and choosing their leafy greens from the supermarket choosing your produce over something else? What's the value proposition that you guys are offering?
Yeah, well, I think ultimately, consumers care about, where their product comes from. They care, certainly that it's sustainably sourced, ethically sourced, but they also care that it's a clean product. And I think that's not just free of, some of these like pathogens, right? Like salmonella or E. coli, but it's also, is it pesticide free? And I think, if you were to see the triple washing that's typically done for leafy greens, you'll see that there's, even after the triple wash, there's still a kind of like a milky white film that's on these plants, and they're packaged with all of that moisture. And a lot of those pesticide residue remains on the plants, which is why everybody has to wash their greens when they take them out of the package, even though they're triple washed. And so our process doesn't require any washing because there's no pesticides ever touching the plant. So I think that's one of the things that we highlight is that it's a pesticide free, it's locally grown, and the value proposition is really that cleanness of the product, but also the product tastes amazing. And that's probably one of the biggest surprises that I've had, at AeroFarms. I always thought we would compete on taste and texture and on the nutrition, but I didn't think we'd really be competing to that extent on taste, because it's really a remarkable product. And that's because we're able to really finely control what nutrients the plants get when they get them, so that we get the best plants possible.
Yeah, and I think that's really important. So a lot of work, we work exclusively in helping develop businesses around environmental, social impact. And I think the biggest mistake we often see is that people position their product around their environmental, social mission. So in your case, around water usage or improving water usage or reducing trucking miles or producing just a better product that's for the environment. But customers don't buy your product for that reason. So I think that positioning around it's a cleaner. It's you don't have to wash it. And it tastes great. It's still got to be a fantastic product. And as a consequence of them purchasing your product over ones that are used during traditional farming methods, you guys deliver on those environmental outcomes. Yeah. But you still have to have a great product that customers love, that they're willing to choose over a competitor.
Yeah, totally. And it's also, we're positioning our company to be a supplier as a price taker. We don't want to be charging a markup because of the sort of the mission driven and socially and environmentally conscious things that we're doing. That's certainly things that we continue to do, and it's who we are. It's in our DNA as a company. But ultimately, if we're really going to change how these types of plants are grown globally, we really need to be thinking about how we can compete with field farmers growing these crops and really be able to compete on price and cost structure. And so we're really building our business model around that so that we can sell ultimately to the consumer at the same, if not a lower price.
So how did you get involved with AeroFarms? So I understand you weren't there right at the beginning. You came in later after AeroFarms has sort of been established a little bit. Tell us that story. Yeah,
well, so it was really the founders this was back in 2012, 2012. They were raising their Series A. I was actually, bizarrely, I was living in Moscow, Russia, doing a fellowship. And I was working for probably the first and only clean technology fund that was actually in Russia at the time. It was just started. It was called the Tatarstan Clean Technology Fund. And the Republic of Tatarstan basically funded a €100 million investment fund to fund clean technologies coming out of Europe and the United States. And I was doing my fellowship with something called the Alpha Fellowship, and I met them. And so I was doing that, and I met the founders through that fund, and they were raising their Series A, and I got connected with them, and was asked to look at the opportunity. And I really had no exposure to vertical farming. I've always been interested in clean technology, and was involved with the Earth Institute when I was at Columbia, and also worked with a group called Active Earth Investments when I was in London, involved in investments in ESG focused metrics and in publicly traded companies. So I've always been interested in that area, but this is the first exposure to vertical farming, and basically was asked to take a close look, and over time really fell in love with the business model. And actually, we weren't able to make an investment through that fund, but helped them with a seed round and really helped build their financial models and got them kind of in a good position to raise their Series A. And then once we got close to closing on our Series A, this was at this point now June or July of 2013. I was obviously looking to move back to New York anyway, and this was a great opportunity to really help build an operating company. And I always felt if you really want to know how to invest and venture capital, you really had to build a company. And so this was a great opportunity, and I really believed in the vision that David and Mark and Ed had for the company, and helped them get going and before they closed their Series A, and help them grow the company ever since.
Yeah, great. So tell us about, say, you've come from, I guess, that VC background where you're looking at the potential of the company, moving into having to actually do it on the ground. Tell us about some of the, what were some of the hardest things that you guess you had to deal with in sort of getting AeroFarms to where it is today? Yeah, well, there really wasn't anything close to a playbook. So, everything was based on assumptions that, were sort of best guesses at the time. Obviously you do as much research as you can, but, these systems, a vertical farm does not scale linearly. And there are a lot of other kind of questions that pop up as they get larger. So the units that, we had been operating were fairly small up until 2013. And so thinking about how to scale these systems and what type of infrastructure was needed, talking about anything from HVAC, electrical, refrigeration, all of that, to packaging, processing, all of that had to really be learned. And, I think in building our first large scale facility, we tried to be as smart as possible on as many things as possible, but on other things, we were really trying not to mess up, not to be stupid on stuff. And so, certainly in certain instances, we underinvested and learned the hard way. And in other things, we probably overinvested and certainly learned the hard way there. And it was a bit of stop and go, but over time, we got the facility to kind of meet its we call it, key performance indicators over time. And, we managed to get to where we needed to be. But there was definitely a lot of stop and go in there. Yeah. So tell me about the very first customer that you guys got. How did that come about? Who was it? Do you guys sell to retailers, or you direct to consumer? Maybe we clarify that. And are you selling through retailers? Yeah. So we were in, so we sell to like Fresh Direct and Whole Foods and ShopRite, and then we sell to a bunch of food service companies. We were in a position where, in Newark, it's kind of hard to build stuff in Newark, New Jersey. It takes time. There's a lot of, Newark has been great to us, but just getting the permits that you need and the approvals that you need, it just takes time.
And when you're a quickly growing organization raising capital, time isn't really on your side. So we really needed to move quickly, and so we actually built a few intermediate facilities before we built our large production facility in Newark to kind of get us up and running. And so we built our first facility. We built actually in an old clothing store / disco kind of thing, and we were growing on like one unit that was about 20 feet long and 7 levels high, about 20 feet high. And that one was really just R&D. I don't think we were selling any product off of that. And then we actually still have that facility, and it does a lot of really, really neat R&D still. And then we moved to another facility that was like an old paintball / like laser tag facility with like these big crazy murals of like I don't know, like Star Wars type stuff, and like Newark like on fire, which we had to paint over, but like all this like crazy stuff. And that's where we ended up. That was about a 20,000 or so square foot facility. And we built 3 units that were about 80 feet long and 7 levels high. And that we really built so that we could get up and running commercially and actually start packaging and growing and selling product to real customers. And that was a big moment, making that transition. And it all happened really quite quickly. And that was I believe it was to ShopRite at the time. We got into a couple of stores and really got, for the first time, feedback on the quality of the product. And, we're able to, really learn a lot more about, what we needed to do from a packaging processing standpoint and, data collection standpoint as well. So that
was Did you have that customer lined up though before you bought that facility, or did you build it on faith?
We built it. We had a lot of interest. So when we built that smaller unit, we had tons of folks coming in all the time, trying the product. Everybody thought the product was incredible. We had a huge support, and everyone was open to us building something and purchasing from us. I think because the demand was so high, we never really felt that was a risk, and we still don't even with much larger facilities see that as a risk, because again, we're really structuring ourselves as a price taker. We're selling at the price points that are already in the market, and almost all customers agree it's a superior product and that it tastes better, it looks better, it's pesticide free and locally grown. So we didn't really see that as a risk. So we were able to build it before.
Yeah, but I guess the key thing you were actively engaging with who your ultimate customers were very early on in the piece. I mean, that's something that we push very hard with our clients. Is test. There's this. We have a lot of them saying, "Oh, we're in stealth mode. We don't want to tell anyone about our product." No, tell everyone. Like get out there and get that feedback as fast and as quickly as you can.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think, to a certain extent, you want to keep your technology, as close as possible, and your IP and your trade secrets and all that. But, when you're talking about customers, getting their feedback early on is hugely helpful. And, even before you start selling, and that's something we definitely do.
Yeah. So if there was someone listening out there at the moment who was thinking about starting an enterprise to address some sort of environmental social issue, what's having gone through what you've been through now, what's the one piece of advice you give someone like that?
Yeah, I mean, it's gonna sound pretty generic, but it really is follow your passion. And I only say that because I always was passionate about the environment and doing things that were socially responsible. And I was also passionate about other stuff. And I studied Russian in college, and I decided, if I'm going to put all the time into doing that, then I might as well go and live there for a little while. And I was always something in the back of my mind that I wanted to do. And so I did it. And I ended up finding this great company. And it wasn't like I planned to find a company and help start this amazing enterprise. And, things don't necessarily work linearly in that way. But I think for me, as long as you're following that kind of inner guidance and you're doing what you're passionate about, things, life is about like the journey, not the destination. So even if you have a different destination in mind, you don't end up there. As long as you're following that journey, I think you're going to end up, not only having a good time, but where you want to go. And I think that's my least my experience.
Yeah, I think virtually every guest has exactly the same advice on that question. Might have to change the question because it's everyone says exactly the same thing, but it's so true. It's like, I mean, when I started my business, I just did it. I just woke up one day, I said, I'm going to have a go. I had no plan, so it's not a process I advocate these days. But I've decided that I was going to have a go.
Yeah, one other piece of advice that probably is not as commonly said, and I spoke to some folks at actually Duke recently, and a similar question came up, but it was really like if you wanted to get into socially responsible business, like what would your advice be? And there, I answered a little bit differently, and I said, well, you don't necessarily have to work for a company that's doing something socially responsible. There are a lot of companies that are doing a lot of harm, and they need good people that think about social responsibility in them to do a lot less harm. And I think if you bring a really good skill set and you can get into those organizations and help them change how they act and do things in a more ethically, socially responsible way, there could be a huge impact there as well. And I think a lot of folks they get into these areas and they're to a certain extent preaching to the choir. And I feel like we also need people working for organizations that aren't necessarily doing the best work and help change them. So another way to answer.
Yeah, great advice. Yeah, change from within. So yeah, that's really good advice. Actually, and a lot of people listening to this podcast are in that position. Yeah, they might be sustainability managers within a business, or they just want to make the world a better place, and they're working within a company that they think has potential. And our view is that every business can have a positive impact, but you do need to do it in a very conscious way. So. All right, so if people wanted to learn more about AeroFarms, or for the audience, tell me about where's AeroFarms today? Where are you guys located? Where can people get your product?
Yeah, so we're currently in Newark, New Jersey, and our products are available throughout the Northeast at Whole Foods, and we're also ShopRite, Fresh Direct. You can order the products online, and then we're actually expanding. Very exciting right now. We're expanding to build a big facility in Virginia, and so that's something I'm very focused on at the moment, and that will get us much broader kind of distribution. So, but if you're interested, if you want to learn more, absolutely go to our website. Feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn or over my email or something like that. Happy to provide that.
There you go. We'll put all that information in the show notes for you who want to have a look at that. But just for the AeroFarms website, what's the website?
Just www.aerofarms.com.
Yeah. All right. So how about let's wrap up with our mad minutes. So 5 quick questions in 60 seconds. So good to go?
I've got to do this. I missed the second part. I got to do this in 60 seconds.
Well, I'm going to change it because we consistently fail to do it within 60 seconds anyway. So I'm going to have to change it, but it sounds better as the mad minute.
I like it. Okay, I'll try it.
A different way. All right. So what's the best piece of advice you've ever received?
Well, so the best piece of advice, my grandfather sat me down when he was about 80 and I was in my early 20s, and he was like, Sam, right now, time is your most valuable asset. And at the time, I actually felt pretty worthless. So I was like, I've got a lot more to offer than just my time. But I guess that in combination with his stare was very impactful. And I think it's just make the best use of your time. And then he also said, I was thinking about going to law school at the time. And he was also like, don't go to law school if you don't want to be a lawyer. And that turned out to be really good advice because I didn't really want to be a lawyer. And I did end up going to law school. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think that time is the one thing you can't get more of. So, very sage advice, I think. What's your favorite business book?
Well, it's not The Art of the Deal. It's I'm actually not really an avid book reader. One of my favorite things that I read when I was in business school was actually The Economic Organization of a POW Camp, and I recommend anybody read that. And whenever I have any doubts in capitalism and I don't feel like it's doing what it needs to be doing for society, I think back to that paper, and I'm kind of angered in it because I know, we're naturally have a tendency towards commerce and trade and how we organize ourselves in society. So definitely recommend reading that to anybody.
Yeah, it's a good one. Yeah, actually, I used to do a lot of business in India, and I got the chance to visit. There's a slum near Mumbai, so it's one of the largest slums in Southeast Asia. And it is, when you actually take an economic view, like it's such a thriving economy in that space, and nothing goes to waste. It's almost like the circular economy personified. So there's some fascinating insights if you look at some different cases around how things actually really work in the world. When you're a kid, what did you want to be when you grew up?
Yeah, I wanted to be like an astronaut, which I guess is fairly typical. But then I realized, like, in order to be an astronaut, you had to be an aerospace engineer, and then I wanted to be an aerospace engineer for a while, and everybody was like, "Why do you want to?" Like, I didn't even know what that meant. And then later, I decided I didn't want to do that, and so the astronaut thing kind of faded away.
Fair enough. Well, I wanted to be an astronaut and a marine biologist, so I'm not sure how that combination would have gone together. But anyway, yeah. So, what's your favorite quote?
You know what? A quote that kind of thinking about a little bit lately. It's actually very, very much from pop culture. It's from Batman, from the Dark Knight, and it was actually in all of the ads for that movie. And Harvey Dent, who turns into Two-Face, actually says, "Either die a hero or live long enough to see yourself become the enemy." And it's an important quote, I think, because a lot of people go into whatever they're doing, I think, with the best intentions, and sometimes it doesn't quite turn out that way. And I think you see a lot of that now in industry and in technology in particular. And I think it's something that's it's always on my mind, because I'm certainly going into this industry and I want to do the best that I can for society and for humanity. And I think it's a great quote, because I think we all have this amazing potential to do good things, but we all have to be really careful to keep doing that throughout our lives.
Great, awesome. I like that one. Now, if you go back in time and give your 20-year-old self some advice, what would it be?
I think I probably stressed out a little bit too much in my 20s. I think I wanted to I was always thinking about the future and not as much enjoying the moment. And I think really in your 20s, you want to experiment, follow your passions, obviously. But I think learning to know what you don't want to do is just as important as knowing what you do want to do. And I think testing things out and trying different things is perfectly fine, so that when you do get to your 30s, you have a better sense and hopefully what you're going to want from life. So
great. Well, that's it. So that was five rapid fire questions in 4 minutes and 37 seconds. So not quite the mad minute. There we go. It doesn't have the same ring to it saying, we're going to do the mad 4 minutes and 37 seconds. Anyway, thanks for taking the time to have a chat to us. I'm really interested to see where you guys go in the future. And I think what you guys are doing is the future of farming. And given the range of environmental challenges that agriculture contributes to, but also can be part of the solution for. So I can't wait to see what you guys do in the future. So thanks for joining us on the Good Business Podcast.
Yeah, no, it's a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Now, if there's one thing that is clear from all of the guests we've spoken to on the Good Business Podcast, is that the first step in creating an impact business is to make sure you have a great product that your customers love. You really need to understand what your customers want and how to communicate with them. Now, if you haven't checked out the great resources available on our website, which includes everything from free ebooks to worksheets to create a testable problem statement for your target customers, then head over to www.bluetribe.co/podcast. Remember, if you like today's episode, make sure you click that like and subscribe button, and tell a friend about the podcast so they can get some inspiration from great businesses doing great things. Coming up in the next episode.
I declared I'm going to climb Kilimanjaro and fundraise the money there. I just took that steadfast belief and idea into, a business opportunity. And that's that wonderful phrase of, you jump off the cliff and build your wings on the way down. I literally did that.
Our guest in the next episode came up with the idea for her business at the top of the highest single freestanding mountain in the world. Can you guess what that mountain was? Well, you'll have to listen to find out. Well, that's it for another episode of the Good Business Podcast. I'm James McGregor. Until next time.